Hey guys, this is Miss Cager. I'm making this recording to go along with the short story Harrison Bergeron that you are reading in your course, your English 2 course this week. This is a short story by Kurt Vonnegut and one of my favorite short stories. So we're going to cover some kind of big ideas that I want you to understand coming out of this short story, kind of some of the takeaways that I want to make sure you have. And since we don't have a class together to cover all these things, I'm doing this video for you. So the first thing to understand about Harrison Bergeron is that this is a dystopian short story. So the word dystopia is very similar to another word that you're probably familiar with, which is utopia. And we know a utopia is this imagined perfect society. If everything was just absolutely perfect, we would call it a utopia. So a dystopia is the opposite of that. A dystopia is a futuristic, imagined universe in which oppressive societal control and the illusion of a perfect society are maintained through corporate, bureaucratic, technological, moral, or totalitarian control. Dystopias, through this exaggerated worst case scenario, make a criticism about a current trend, societal norm, or a political system. So typically, dystopian fiction is used when an author finds something that he really feels is a problem in society or politics or current events, and he creates this kind of exaggerated society in his fiction work that really highlights and focuses on that problem and draws out the problems almost by contrast, by making it look like it's worse than it is. In dystopian fiction, some of the characteristics we'll see are propaganda used to control the citizens of that dystopian society within the work. So information, independent thought, and freedom are restricted in dystopian works. Some sort of figurehead or concept is worshipped by the citizens of the society. Citizens are perceived to be under some sort of constant surveillance. So someone's always watching, waiting, looking at everything that you do. These citizens often have a fear of the outside world. So anything outside of this dystopian society in which they live, they're very fearful or at least very apprehensive about. They often live in a dehumanized state. The natural world is typically banished or distrusted. The citizens conform to uniform expectations. Individuality and dissent are bad. And the society is an illusion of a perfect utopian world, but we really see the problem specifically that author's focusing on will really surface in their work. So some types of dystopian controls that we'll see are corporate control, where one or more large corporations control the society, whether it's through products, advertising, or the media. So some examples that you might have seen in movies would be movies like Minority Report or The Running Man. Bureaucratic control is where society is controlled by a mindless bureaucracy through a tangle of red tape, relentless regulations, and incompetent government officials. So, an example of one of these movies would be the movie Brazil. Technological control. These are really popular. They make really entertaining movies. And in these types of dystopian societies, society is controlled by technology, whether it's through computers, robots, scientific means, any other kind of AI or artificial intelligence. So some really popular examples of these movies are the Matrix trilogy, The Terminator, and one of my favorite movies, I, Robot. And finally, we have philosophical or religious control. And this is where society is controlled by philosophical or religious ideology, often enforced through some sort of dictatorship or theocratic government. In Harrison Bergeron, we have a very strong protagonist. And we call these a dystopian protagonist because we see some characteristics kind of across the board with the dystopian protagonist that we don't always see in our protagonist characters. The dystopian protagonist often feels trapped and they are struggling to escape. They question the existing social and political systems in which they live. They might believe or feel that something is terribly wrong with the society in which he or she lives. They can sense some kind of problem, whether it's a really obvious problem or some sort of underlying problem. And the dystopian protagonist is the one that helps the audience recognize the negative aspects of this dystopian world through his or her perspective. So they really kind of bring to light the negative aspect of society in which the author has created. Harrison Bergeron is set in the future. It's set when constitutional amendments have made everyone equal. In this story, the agents of the handicapper general, this is a character in the story, the handicapper general, also called the HG men, are an allusion to the practice in the 1940s and 1950s of referring to the FBI and Secret Service officers as G-men, the G standing for government officials, to enforce these equality laws. People are made equal in this story by devices which bring them down to the normalcy level in the story, which is actually below average in intelligence, strength, and ability. These devices include things like weights to stunt speed and strength, masks, red rubber clown noses, or thick glasses to hide good looks and make seeing difficult. We see radio transmitters that are implanted in the ears of intelligent people, and these radio transmitters will emit sharp noises 2 or 3 times a minute to prevent sustained thought. So basically, in this text, we see where the government has implemented all kinds of means to equalize people across the board. So the way they've done that, rather than taking the weaker people and raising the standard and making them all equal up here, in this story, they've really just lowered the standard to make everybody equal down here. So people that are exceptionally strong or exceptionally fast are physically weighted down. They have to wear weighted belts or vests to slow them down. People that are really smart have these radio transmitters in their ear that make these piercing sounds to keep them from being able to think or concentrate and have like a real stream of thought. So to make everybody equal, they've had to lower the standard to below average intelligence, strength, and ability. So some of the thematic ideas in this story are things like equality, freedom, and power. This was published in 1961 in a science fiction magazine and didn't get a whole lot of publicity, but it became really popular later on in the 1980s. And of course, now, 2021, we're reading it, 60 years later, as it's a pretty steady staple in high school curriculum. So throughout this story, we see several different literary elements, and I'm going to kind of talk you through those so that you know what they look like and what some of those examples are. We see the use of satire, and satire is the use of humor and wit with a kind of critical attitude, some irony, sarcasm, or ridicule for exposing or denouncing the frailties and faults of mankind's activities and institutions like folly, stupidity, or vice. This usually involves both moral judgment and a desire to help improve a certain custom, belief, or tradition. So it's kind of like a sarcastic way to make fun of something that needs to be changed or be improved. Satire, ridiculing a person, place, or idea with the notion of effecting change, always involves this idea of morality. And in this story, Vonnegut, the author, satirizes the notion of handicapping people in order to enforce equality, this failure of rebellion, and the apathy engendered in people who watch television and authoritarian government. The story uses satire and this kind of humor that we refer to as black humor The humor mostly involves the two parents, George and Hazel, although the appearance of Harrison, their son, with his red rubber nose, his artificially created bad teeth, this 300 pounds of extra weight that they make him carry, this is actually kind of a comical scene when you look at it literally. Like, what are we actually looking at? This man with a rubber nose and blacked out teeth and all this extra weight. It's funny, but it's funny in a way that's kind of poking humor. It's poking fun at the ridiculousness of society in order to create some sort of change. We see this throughout the story. The humorous dialogue between Hazel and George Bergeron could be considered Black humor, which has proved kind of difficult to define. Black humor is related to kind of sick humor, like making fun of, say, someone's disability, and gallows humor, where people are laughing in the midst of helplessness, as well as the absurd, which is just something that's so far-fetched that it's almost unbelievable or implausible. Black humor can kind of incorporate all of these characteristics. So you might have heard of it as dark humor, or you might have heard someone say, oh, that person has a really dark sense of humor. This is kind of what they're referring to. Like, they kind of find some comedy in things that are really just kind of terrible. It can be defined as the juxtaposition of pain and laughter, unusual fact and calmly inadequate reactions, and cruelty and tenderness. The ending dialogue in this story between Hazel and George juxtaposes all three of those things because Hazel and George have just witnessed the killing of their son on TV. And if you haven't read this story yet, you want to read this and you want to pay attention. This ending conversation between George and Hazel is just, if you go back and really look at it, it's kind of disturbing because you think about what they've just seen, what they've just witnessed, and then they enter into this dialogue that just seems so unbelievable. Um, and that's another example that the author uses of satire. So the setting of the story is set 120 years into the future, and it allows readers to more easily accept some of the more absurd events. The actual physical location of the story doesn't matter and is therefore unknown. We don't know. He doesn't give us a physical place. The story is told in third person, limited point of view. The narrator is not a character in the story, but he is privy to the thoughts of one character. Readers are allowed to know what George Bergeron is thinking, as when he says he was toying with the vague notion that maybe dancers shouldn't be handicapped. The events in Harrison Bergeron are related by an objective narrator. The narrator does not draw conclusions, make decisions, or make judgments about the events. The objectivity of the narrator suggests a distancing from the hostile world of the story. Illusion, guys, we struggled with this in the first semester. So I hope that some of these things will kind of ring true to you. An allusion is a reference to a person, a historical event, or some other literature outside of the text. So in Harrison Bergeron, the month of April, which, quote, still drove people crazy by not being springtime, is doubly elusive. Initially referring to the first line of T.S. Eliot's 1922 poem titled The Wasteland. April is the cruelest month in that poem. The second allusion, derived from April, stems from the first. The title of the poem also serves in part as a title of the 1961 speech by then Federal Communications Commission Chair Newton Minow. And in that speech, he refers to T.S. Eliot's poem, referring to television as a vast wasteland. The abbreviation of the handicapper general, the HG-min, ironically alludes to the abbreviation G-men, that was used in the 1940s and 50s for government agents, Secret Service agents, FBI agents in the US. Generally, these government agents were held in high esteem, unlike the G-men, until the 1960s and 70s when their activities came into legal and ethical question. We see an illusion of Diana Moon, the handicapper general's first and middle names, refers to the Roman goddess of the hunt, Diana, who is associated with the moon. Diana was known for her vengeance, which could explain the ruthless killing of Harrison Bergeron in the story. And Thor, identified in the story as the god of thunder, was in Norse mythology the oldest and most powerful son of Odin, king of the gods. He possessed great strength and skill in fighting. This illusion serves to underscore Harrison's strength without his handicaps. And the last one, the final allusion, is to the comedy team of George Burns and Gracie Allen and to their television show. The dialogue at the end of the story reflects similar dialogues at the end of the Burns and Allen television show. Gracie, who played a scatterbrain, would indeed repeat lines when George used the phrase, "You can say that again," just as Hazel Bergeron does in the story. So, if you haven't read this story, you definitely need to do that. Okay? It's an interesting story. It's something that you will enjoy, I think. You need to go back and review after listening to this PowerPoint and kind of look for some of these examples or some of the things we talked about. I definitely encourage you to do that as well. I'm also going to include a link to a short film version of this story. There's a long movie that just came out. It's been several years, but there's a pretty good one that's only about 26 minutes long. So if you liked the story and you want to watch it as a film, I'm going to include that link below this video. So I look forward to seeing you guys in class. Enjoy.